You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. We enter the world of divination and tarot this week in the company of Alaric Albertsson and unlock the secrets that even a standard set of playing cards can hold for all of us. Alaric guides us through a history tied to magic, mysticism, and more. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/Mysteries and Monsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. Thank you to each and every one of you that support the show with your contributions each month. It means a great deal. You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media networks. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news and episodes. You can find our exclusive merchandise site with TeePublic, and the link is in the show notes as usual. Our intro and outro music are performed by the incredible Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. Now, let us discover how a humble deck of cards can be a fortune in your hands. For many, the only form of cartomancy that people seem to know of is the modern tarot deck. Yet tarot, as we know it, evolved from card decks and games that originated in Italy back in the 15th century. The divination power of a standard pack of cards seems to have fallen out of favour. But thankfully, in his latest book, Fortune in Your Hands, author Alaric Albertsson shows us just how the humble playing deck can work in our favours. Alaric, welcome to Mysteries and Monsters.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a delight to speak to somebody in regards to this particular subject. As we were sort of chatting before we started the interview proper, Alaric, when I saw this book and began to read it, I'm always trying to learn new things, and what I knew 6-7 years ago compared to what I know now is a vastly different thing. I think I've spoken to so many learned and knowledgeable people in a variety of subjects around the world, but when I saw your book, I had an emotional response to it, which was quite surprising, because at the end of the day, we're just talking about the divination power of a standard playing deck. But for me, I'm always surprised when people seem shocked or perplexed when we talk about the divination of a normal playing deck, because my grandmother taught me how to do this 40 odd years ago, and it's one of those things that's dropped out because I've not done it for so long, Alaric. And so reading your book took me to a place where I didn't think emotionally I was going to go, and therefore I found it quite a warm read, but perhaps not in the way that you as the author anticipated for certain people like me.
Well, I didn't really anticipate it, but I'm really glad to hear that, because, writing it was kind of a similar experience for me, even though I've used playing cards, throughout my life. Actually writing the book took me back to when I was learning myself. And you're right. I mean, I had a similar experience. This is the first way I learned how to do any kind of divination. It was with an ordinary deck of playing cards. It was longer ago than that for me because I'm older than you. But, basically in the early 70s, that was all that was available. In Europe, there were some tarot decks. Obviously, there were tarot decks since the 1400s, 1500s. But as far as them being common, they weren't really a common sort of thing. And in the United States, where I live, there just literally were no tarot decks until U.S. Games bought the rights to the Rider-Waite deck in 1971. And even then, it wasn't suddenly what everyone was doing, but very quickly, within 5 years, it seemed like everybody I knew was using tarot. And I can see why. There are nice things, advantages to it. First of all, you don't really have to know anything about tarot to read tarot. You can study that forever and get more out of it. But you could also just pick up a deck of tarot cards, and since everyone has a little picture on it that tells you what it means, you can just start off doing it, which you can't do with playing cards. You actually have to learn something before you can use the playing cards. On the other hand, over the years, I found that tarot wasn't ever really working well for me. And I think one of the reasons was because every card has a little picture on it. In other words, someone is telling me how to interpret that card. I'm not doing the interpretation necessarily. Now, to clarify, because I don't want to rain on someone else's parade, there are some great tarot readers out there, and the really good ones, I do understand they're not letting the artist tell them how to interpret the card. They can look at that picture and then go beyond that and pull out of themselves what the interpretation is. But for me, and I learned since then, like for other people, for some people, having an artist tell you what the card means gets in the way, or can get in the way, of your own intuitive process. And you can't deny that it gives a bias to the interpretation. If you go from one deck to another, depending on who the artist is, and now they're just like Looney Tunes. I mean, it's like the cat tarot, the goose tarot, like any weird thing we can come up with, we're going to make a tarot deck out of it. And they have different images. They tend to be similar, especially in the Trump suit, the major arcana. But, they can definitely be different. For example, in Robin Wood's tarot, which I think is absolutely beautiful, and I love it. It would be like my second choice if I had to do tarot. It's a really good deck. But in Rider-Waite, they have the card, the Devil, okay? In Robin Wood's deck, it's the Horned One. And it's a totally different concept from what's presented in Rider-Waite, a completely different spin. So there's an example of how if you get a tarot deck, you have an artist telling you what that card is going to mean. For example, just to pull one out. Okay, here's a good one. 3 of Hearts. You don't have anything here. 3 of Hearts has to do with emotion because it's hearts. And it's a 3, so we're talking about something that's very new and very tentative. It's not a powerful card. It's a hint of something. It has potential, has a lot of potential here, but you're not quite there yet. That's all you got. Everything else you have to pull out of your heart. I tend to think of it as, when I see it, the first thing I think of is like hobbies. But it wouldn't have to be a literal hobby. It's those simple pleasures that may lead you someplace, but they're not permanent goals in themselves. So this is how you take an abstract symbol, but you see what I mean? It's like, if you just look at this, there's nothing that gives you that interpretation. You have to learn something first.
Well, like you say, even on a standard level, as you say there, in regards to depending on the type of deck that you use and the art that's being used on it, Alaric, you're automatically receiving messages of bias, unconsciously or not. And as you say there, when you're looking at different imaging used for similar cards in different decks, straight away on a subconscious level, when you see, as you mentioned there, a card called the Devil or the Horned One, that all points you in certain directions, or it may often lead you to be questioning your own knowledge, because, as you say, the Devil and the Horned One, to some people, may mean the same thing entirely. But for anybody that's studied or knows anything about paganism or Wicca or anything, they will know that they are very different characters with very different positions in the system.
Yeah, and Robin Wood intended to have that very different interpretation. She took something that was Christian symbolism and took it out, which is, there's tradition right there, because the Rider-Waite was very much that way. The original tarot decks, they were not intended for divination. They were intended for playing cards with. And they were made by very rich families in Italy. We're not talking about kind of wealthy families. We're talking about, that upper 1% that owns everything. And they added a trump suit to the regular deck of cards for a game that they called Taroki. And they spent just an obscene amount of money on these. First of all, they weren't mass printed. They were hand painted, all of them. So just that Trump suit alone, you had like 22 paintings, portraits that you were paying for, and expensive ones. The originals, when there was gold, it was actually gold. They gilded the cards, so these were not things that normal people had, so you have really, really rich people who are spending just disgusting amounts of money for this idle little game, and that looks bad. But they want everybody to know that, but they are good Christians.
Yes.
So the Trump suit is filled with Roman Catholic imagery in the original decks. The Pope, and Judgment Day, the devil, it's like all this Roman Catholic imagery. But then when Pamela Smith, who was the actual person who painted all the images for the Rider-Waite deck, when she painted those images, she was a member of the Reformed, some branch of the Order of the Golden Dawn. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that imagery back then in the early 1900s, they took the Christian imagery and kind of changed it a lot to make it more of because they wanted to use it for magic and divination. So you have things like the Pope suddenly becomes the Hierophant, and things like that. So it just becomes a little less Catholic and a little more witchy, So Robin Hood changing the devil to the horned one, it's like that's just following in the tradition of the tarot. And like I said, I do love the deck, but it's also a good example of how every deck does have a bias to it. And when you use Rider-Waite, you're going to have some different images hitting you than you will if you use Robin Hood, or if you use Morgan Greer, or if you use the Alice in Wonderland deck or whatever you picked up at the store yesterday.
I think that can sometimes be quite confusing for some people, especially people who are new to it, Alaric, because as you say, when you get a tarot deck, most of them come with a guide and they'll tell you how it works and everything. So straight away, you've essentially got the basic kit to begin it, and then you sort of work on that. The intention is that as you progress and you learn more, you then start, or you should really, have the cards, but it's your intuition that should be guiding you rather than, as can sometimes happen, the card guides the intuition, or it makes you jump to a conclusion that's perhaps not there. And I suppose it can be quite daunting because, as you say, I know I can go into my local shop in regards to these kinds of products and availability of them. And there's at least, off the top of my head, I think the last time I went in, there was at least 40 to 50 different sets. And every time I go, I mean, they are beautiful things. I think they're phenomenal just for that, to admire them on an artistic level, regardless of the intention. And I can see, as someone with some strange collecting hobbies myself, Alaric, I can see how people can get obsessed with trying to have as many decks as possible, because they are beautiful works of art in their own right, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's kind of unique to me. Tarot, one wonderful, beautiful thing about it is that it literally is an art form for the magical community. It's something that we have. It's our own unique art form. And in that respect, I'm just amazed by it. For somebody who promotes runes and playing cards, you'd be surprised at how many tarot decks I've got upstairs in my library. Hey, that was cool, so I have to have that. But for practical work, like I said, it's like they don't work for me, which doesn't mean they're not going to work for someone else. But that's one reason I wrote the book. And another reason was I just didn't want to see that methodology that just go extinct. And I do feel like people don't talk about it. People don't look at it as an option as much anymore. I love working with playing cards. And frankly, my two things, I have a lot of different things I might use. I have a pendulum, I've got crystal balls, I got scrying mirrors, I have all sorts of things like that. But my two go-to methods for when I want to find out what's going on around me and what I need to be doing are runes and playing cards. And you'll notice a similarity there because runes are kind of similar in that there's a symbol to kick you off but it doesn't really show you that much. And you can go to the old rune poem and you get this cool little 3 or 4 lines in Old English, and it still doesn't really tell you that much, but it points you in the right direction.
Yes.
And it reveals an Old English mystery, and then that brings it out of me. I still like using playing cards. I can't really tell you, there's no rule on when I'm going to pick up a deck of cards and when I'm going to reach for my runes. There's no real rule about it. I just know which one I need to go to. Or sometimes, if I'm just not getting the answer from one, I might go to the other for clarification. Because they're, divination systems, they're languages. They are different languages. And, they both might be talking to me about the same thing, but they're going to express it in different ways. Okay, well, see, you're English, I'm American. Here's a good example right now. If you go to a foreign language, and if I don't know how many foreign languages, if any, the only thing I can understand at all is Old English and Spanish and English. Okay? Don't get me started on French, because French to me is just someone going pew, 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 pew. I do not understand French at all. But Spanish and Old English. And, I do realize when you go from English to Spanish, meanings change a lot. But even within English, you go from one place to another, your English and my English. And I have found this out the hard way. I've been to England, because of some of my other books, but also just because that's my spirituality, is Anglo-Saxon spirituality. Yes. And I wanted to visit the land of my ancestors. So I have been to England multiple times to explore that. And, I talk to anybody who will talk to me. And every once in a while, I'll be talking to somebody and they're just staring at me and say, oh, what did I say this time? I found out the hard way that Fanny in America means something totally different.
Yes, it does.
So, you know what I'm saying? And if that's, I don't know how bad it is in England. So if you have to censor that.
No, trust me.
That.
I was going to say, the amount of times growing up watching American TV shows, Alaric, and I'd hear somebody say that they were wearing a fanny pack, and we'd all be like, what? What are they talking about? What? And we'd all be laughing, going, oh, that's rude. Lancashire. Yes.
And I was at a little pub up there, and I just got into a conversation with a British woman, and we're talking about stuff. I don't know what we were talking about, but I referred to a fanny pack, and she literally, in the old sense of literally, not the new sense of not literally, she literally fell off her stool. She was laughing so hard. And I had no idea what I said that was so funny. So, but that's the thing. It's even when we're speaking English, the language can change. Language can have different meanings. And likewise, if I'm using the runes, they're speaking to me in a certain language. And if I switch to playing cards, suddenly I have another language. So some things come through better. In a very general sense, I found that the deep questions, the things that really have to do with long-term decisions and with my soul, runes tend to be the better source for me. But if it's, what do I want to do this weekend? More light, practical, temporary sort of things, for me, the playing cards work better. But again, there's not a hard and fast rule. There's another reason to learn about playing cards. Even if you have a different method of divination, I feel like the more methods of divination you have at your fingertips, the more effective you're going to be, because each one is a different language. Each one can express things in a slightly different way and give you more insights.
Do you think sometimes there is a danger in the modern era, especially because of how much of a renaissance witchcraft is having in the modern era? Especially as you refer to there, Alaric, you were one of those people that discovered it sort of the tail end of the 60s, early 70s, when it all sort of started kicking off in America, especially, where sort of a catalyst from sort of the peace and love era that we're all very aware of. Clearly, a lot of people started searching out other spiritual paths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a definite connection there, and it was a very different world back then. I can tell you that, like Ray Buckland, who was an Englishman who moved to the United States. He was incredibly influential in popularizing Wicca throughout the United States. And then he went on to create his own Seax Wicca tradition, and people do not realize how influential this man was. There are a lot of non-Wiccan paths out there. I can pretty much tell you almost every Anglo-Saxon spiritual path we have in the United States traces at least indirectly back to Ray Buckland. Some of them, if they are listening to this podcast, they will be gnashing their teeth and calling down the curses of the gods on me. I'm protected from that. But, they just hate that idea. But it's true. When he started the Seax tradition, that really drew a lot of people to Anglo-Saxon spirituality. And then a lot of those people, they started that and they're like, well, I'm not really digging the Wicca part, but I really like Woden, and then they took off to form things like theism and movements like that. So, yeah, there were a few people who were incredibly influential. Paul Husson was very influential. Sybil Leek,
Yes.
So, and well, there's another one. There's an English person who moved to the United States. If it wasn't for you guys coming over to the United States, we'd probably all be Southern Baptists, So thank you so much for exporting some of your people over here to show us the way.
Well, a smile came across my face when I was reading the introduction of the book, because you obviously mentioned a lady who I think gets really overlooked these days, which is Louise Huebner.
Yeah.
Who was probably one of the most noticeable, probably the first sort of witch that kind of hit the popular zeitgeist in sort of the late 60s. She became I would imagine she became sort of the sort of spokesperson for modern Wicca in its growth, especially through that period, because you can...
And trust me, take it from an old person. I didn't know her personally, but the people who I knew, a lot of people were influenced by her writing. One of the big thrills for me was when, through Facebook, we became friends.
Yes.
And I know that sounds so groupie, silly, and I didn't even have Facebook until I was an author myself, But so she was so influential back then. People have forgotten her. They don't really give her credit. I wouldn't recommend her necessarily. For most seekers, not that there's she was a bad person, but I don't think she's what most people are looking for. She was really into the publicity, for starters. That's one reason she was so well known, is she milked that. She somehow got some officials in the county of Los Angeles to make her the official witch of Los Angeles. And then that was, her byline on everything. And some of her products that came out, these little booklets you could get and everything, they had this whole spooky witchy theme that, was cute, but, it's like, it's going to appeal more to people in grade school than, adults. But like I said, she was not Wiccan. I don't really know how religious she was even. There was very little spirituality in her writing. She was totally into just the magic. Here's the magic. Here's how to do it. She did, in her book, Power Through Witchcraft, make one reference to her grandmother talking about the old gods. But that's it.
Yeah.
This is it. So if you're looking for a spiritual path, this is not the woman to go for. But she was really good at magic and spellcasting and that sort of thing, and that attracted a lot of people to her. And she promoted playing card, was one of the people who promoted playing card divination. I actually kind of went back after I'd written Fortune in Your Hands and pulled out my old copy of her book that addresses playing card divination. I kind of went through it just to make sure I wasn't like unconsciously plagiarizing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I did intentionally plagiarize, but it's possible to read something and it goes into your subconscious. You're not even thinking about it. Now, there are going to be similarities because we're both writing about playing card divination. I just didn't want it to look like I was copying what she was saying, because she did have a big influence on me, but she was not the only person who used that technique by any means. Over the years, I've met many people who use playing cards, and sometimes the interpretations and the approach would be very, very different. But another thing that happened over the years was I noticed a pattern emerging. You know what I'm saying? And that was one thing I wanted to put in my book, because after I saw the pattern, I thought, when I learned, I had literally had to memorize each card, what this card is supposed to mean. There's 52 of them. You know, that takes a lot of dedication to learn all these different meanings, and it's so hard to keep them in your mind. But then after I saw the pattern, it's like, well, why don't they just teach me this? So that's what I present in Fortune in Your Hands, is the pattern. Basically, to look at the suits, the 4 suits, which tie in very closely with the 4 base elements of, Western elemental theory. And then the numbers, and I think even people who don't have any training in like numerology, they're still going to respond to it, because, if I say, hey, he's number 1 in my book, you don't have to study numerology to know what I meant by that.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So, numbers have an effect on our subconscious just automatically.
Yes.
And that's kind of my approach on how I show people how to read cards, is how to learn the suits, how to learn the numbers, and then you put them together. So all the 3s have something in common. So the 3 of hearts, all of your 3s are going to be something that is new, something that's coming into your life. It's not a very powerful force, but it has a potential to become more. When you get to the 6s always, and this doesn't really fit with conventional numerology, but 6s in card divination always have to do with depletion, with less of this energy. And then you combine that with your 4 suits, which correspond to earth, water, air, and fire. And basically they correspond to fortune or destiny, and emotions, and transformation, and then actual non-transformative, but change, movement change. Put those together. And so that makes it so much easier. You have to memorize 9 numbers, learn what 9 numbers mean, and they are numbers that you grew up with, so you have an intuitive sense of them anyway. And then you have to learn the 4 suits. So much easier than having to learn 52 different card meanings. Can you tell I still that?
Yes, absolutely. I think it is often that, especially when we're dealing with subjects like this, because this is one of those things that I suppose in the olden days, Alaric, they would call this suppressed knowledge or hidden knowledge, because it seems to be one of those things that it all depends on who you know, who had this gift or this ability to read playing cards, rather than focusing on tarot or using some other sort of method of gaining an insight or a feeling or whatever. As you referred to earlier, there are so many ways that often people can get fixated on one particular one. Like, as we were saying, some people will focus purely on tarot. They won't use playing deck or runes or other things, or even tea leaves or whatever. There seems to be, I think sometimes in the modern era, it all depends on how you find out that information, and often you find yourself hemmed in, not through your own lack of ability to sort of break free from that shackle, but I think often when you learn something, you often will think that that's the only way, unless you then meet someone with perhaps a bit more knowledge or a bit more experience in different fields who will say, well, what about trying it this way? Or what about doing it like that? And I think for you as well, with someone with the aspects that you've got in regards to focusing more on the sort of Anglo-Saxon abilities and looking at that history and the way that belief system, that's quite a unique slant on it in the modern era as well, because often more people will tend to focus on the more popular sides of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're absolutely right about that. And there is very much a trendy sort of element to the magical community. And I think that's just human nature. Even with runes, I've seen that. You're English. I guess you know that.
Sometimes.
So
yes.
If you were interested in runes, I would say study the Old English runes. If someone's interested, now here, for some reason, it's just a thing. Americans are just fascinated with Vikings. Apparently, plundering and raping and pillaging is a cool thing. So, Vikings are so cool. Well, for someone who really wants to explore Scandinavian spirituality, I would say study the Younger Futhark, the actual runes that the Viking used. But if you look at what's actually done today, almost everybody, 99 point something or other % of the people who get into runes go for the Elder Futhark, a Proto-Germanic set of runes that we really don't know anything about. There is no extant lore telling us what those very, very old runes meant. And like I said, it's like a language sort of thing. What happened was, people took things like the Old English rune poem and the Norse rune poem and the Icelandic rune poem, and from those kind of made up what the runes of the Elder Futhark are supposed to represent. But they could be saying Fanny and not realizing what they're actually saying.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Just because you've got this symbol here and you've got this person over here who has a similar symbol, and that's what that and tells you what their symbol means, it doesn't mean that this symbol means the same thing.
Yes.
So really nothing is known about the Elder Futhark. But everybody goes to that, and almost every book that is written about the runes is that. It's the trendy thing. And then divination overall. What does everybody go to? They go to tarot. It's the trendy thing. So there's another reason to learn playing cards, because, if you can read playing cards, you're actually doing something cool that the people right down the street are not doing.
Yeah.
When someone comes up and says, I read tarot, my first thing in my head is like, whoop-de-doo-doo-doo. Everybody reads tarot. Something interesting,
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't have said that.
I suppose it is, though, as well, because, as you say, that's an interesting aspect of that, because runes, I think, when people think of Viking culture, they presume that they all had the same version of the language. Do
not call Norwegian Swedish. I learned that. Do not do that.
Yes, well, I'm frequent. I've been to Norway a few times, and a country that seems to be very comfortable with its legend and lore there, Alaric. And so when you look at these kind of things, it is strange how people just presume, like the Celts, they presume that the Celts all spoke the same language.
The Celts. I hate that. The Celts. It's like saying, well, we do this in the United States all the time. The Native Americans. Like there were people who ever called themselves, we're the Native Americans, and they go to the Native American church and they speak Native American. It's like, no, they're like a bunch of different people with different languages and different beliefs and different cultures and Celtic thing. I can tell you are an educated man. You know damn well that Welsh belief and Irish belief, these are like, you're comparing apples and potatoes. They're two different things. So, yeah, there's another thing. If someone starts telling me, I'm really into Celtic, blah, 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 I'm like, okay, so there's your trend.
Yes, well, it is, because obviously that was something that was quite fashionable. I remember, obviously, during the boom in the 90s, Celtic symbolism and imagery became really sort of trendy in the 90s period, and you can see it's kind of moved on from that point, but these things just come in, don't they?
Anything, and suddenly you can charge more because you just called it Celtic,
Yes.
Celtic interlacing. It's like, you do know that the Germanic people were using interlacing also. It's just Northern European. It's not just a Celtic thing. And so now you're going to get me on a soapbox because that sort of thing really annoys me.
Well, it is, and it's become one of those archetypes, I think, and like you say, a trope or a cliche even sometimes, because one of my things that I really enjoy is wherever we go somewhere, we'll have a wander around the local graveyard, because you can always find all kinds of fascinating things in there. And that's a prime example that you see lots of Celtic crosses in my local area, but this was not anything to do with the Celtic. It was fashionable. Certain people in the 1850s and 1860s thought, oh, that would make a really lovely design for my headstone. There's nothing else. There's no symbolism there. It's just a fashion statement.
Yeah, I get that. That comes up a lot too on that trendy sort of thing. So honestly, that's one reason why I have made multiple trips to England and love talking to British people. I become my friend, just, be you. And because of the subjects that are dear to my heart and things that I actually write about, I'm aware of the fact that, I probably don't sound all that British to you, I mean, I talk funny, I didn't grow up there. It's far, far away. It's like I wanted to go and really experience England and find out what's real versus what I'm hearing. Mm. Even if you're reading something that's supposed to be kind of scholastic, there's always, everybody has an agenda, so what's real about this? What's really going on? And I'm fortunate that since I am an author, I now have fans or whatever, people who I know who are English, people from all over the country, but I especially value people in England who I can get together with and have conversations with, emails or whatever, and talk about different things and get their perspective on things, because it's very easy. Everybody has an agenda. It's very easy for me to make England be what I want it to be.
Yes.
Not in any hostile way or a bad way, but that's just human nature. So I like really getting to the source, having conversations. And, there are people who've read my books who we get along so well because they were delighted to have someone writing about Anglo-Saxon when, as the Celtic thing. I've had people say everything I read is about Celtic, and my ancestors were Anglo-Saxon. And so I feel like I have done a good thing in helping some British people reconnect and explore their Anglo-Saxon heritage. But again, it's their Anglo-Saxon heritage. Okay, I do have an Anglo-Saxon heritage. I mean, if you get right down to it, I'm descended from the Oaks and the Potters and the Tauntons. I'm descended from a lot of English families, but it's still different. I'm always very conscious and aware of the fact that I was born in North America and grew up here. So I try to be very respectful and objective about what I'm saying about England and the English people and their history. So I try to stay away from the trends.
Well, it's quite amusing. I know friends that live in Canada, and they've come to the UK, and they'll say, well, I can drive for 6-7 hours in Canada, and it doesn't matter where I'm at, and everybody still sounds the same. They still use the same colloquialisms and everything. If you drive for 6 hours in England, you've gone through 20 different accents. You've no idea what somebody's saying to you anymore, because they don't sound anything like the people you were speaking to 3 hours ago. And in fact, half the time you're not really sure what they're saying to you. You just know it's some form of English.
Absolutely. Have you ever been to York?
Yes.
They actually speaking English. I mean, I visited York, and I swear, anytime someone came up and said anything to me, my response 3 out of 4 times was, I'm not from here. I have found, for me, the further north you go in England, the more difficult it is to understand people, which is not their fault at all. It is not a put down. One of my most wonderful experiences that I had was someplace up in the north. I don't remember exactly where I was, but I stopped in at this little pub, and some shepherd suddenly became my buddy. And he knew the guy who owned the pub, and I I couldn't hardly understand a word he said, but between repeating ourselves and a little bit of, charades and things, we were able to kind of communicate. But he was so wonderful. He actually, American here, so even the food's different. He realized really early in our discussion that to me, there was this stuff called beer that was this yellow stuff you're supposed to drink and just beer. And so he talked to his friend who owned the pub and brought to me one at a time. He'd bring me like shot glasses with a lager, with a bitters, with a stout, these different things, and explain to me what they were and let me try these different things and get a feel for all the different variety there is. And I just, right there, I already loved England, but I fell in love with English beer. I discovered that my favorite is bitters, which I would never have even tried because it is literally called bitter. Yeah. Which doesn't sound very appetizing, but so it's like when I say that I couldn't understand them, that is not putting them down. The people in northern England, for the most part, were just lovely people. But it's true. You go from one part of England to another, and it's the language difference is, there's so much of a change. Whereas your Canadian friends are right. Now, we do have language. We have differences here. Yes. I'm living in Dubuque, Iowa now. Yes. Nobody in Dubuque sounds like me. Okay. I grew up in Arkansas and Missouri, so I grew up further south, and I have a little bit of a southern accent. If I go up there, I don't have to say I'm from the South. As soon as I open my mouth, they know this, Likewise, they all sound like a bunch of Yankees to me, like they sound very northern. Yes. But I do think it's interesting. I can travel like 1,000 miles and never have to worry about a language difference. Everywhere I go, everyone speaks the same language, and, you can't drive 1,000 miles at all because you're going to fall into the ocean.
Yeah, we'd have to try and take a detour just in case.
To me, that's fascinating that you are so close to the ocean, no matter where you are. I when I got home from my trips to England, I used to I would try to recreate dishes that I'd have there. Yes, seafood dishes, and they were never right. They were never any good. And finally, my husband said, he's like, it's not what you're doing wrong. The flavor is the same. It's the fact that you're using fish that was caught 3 weeks ago in the Atlantic and frozen and then shipped and then unfrozen. Whereas, I go to England and I get something and they just pulled it out of the water, 2 hours ago. And it really makes a difference.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's nothing better, Alaric, than fresh fish and chips at a British coastal town, because it tastes completely different to how I would get fish and chips here in Sheffield. So it's the little things that you don't think about until you try and put that into practice, and then you realise that you've got all the right ingredients. It's been caught somewhere else. It's not been kept the same, and therefore it looks the same, but it's not.
But even the stuff you're getting in Sheffield, it's like you're still, compared to what I get. I mean, you cannot be in your country. You cannot be more than like 75 miles from the ocean. It's just physically impossible. I am literally 1,000 miles or more from the closest ocean.
Well, where I am, we're smack in the middle, so it's exactly the same distance either side.
But you're still a lot closer than I am.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll take us just over 2 hours to get to the coast here.
I'm smack in the middle too. I'm just in the much bigger middle.
Absolutely. Yeah, you'd have to fly there. We can just drive.
Okay. Yeah, no, there's no way I could drive, but we're talking days, literally days of driving to get there.
Have you found, through your personal practices and your respect for your elders and your ancestors, Alaric, that has seen you kind of focus on more older practices that, as we were saying here, that we're talking about the use of playing cards and divination? These would seem to be the classical ways of using divination and connecting to your surroundings and unlocking your own personal spirituality and your pathway. Do you think that that's something that some people just don't realize that? And as we were joshing about the Celts and the Vikings and whatever, people want to focus on the trendy things. It's like when a big example of things like that, when people sort of look for their ancestors, is St. Patrick's Day, which is a massive thing in America. And it's a very popular thing here in Britain, regardless. But people will still sort of focus on these things that, once again, it becomes a romantic version. Like you were saying about England, you didn't want it to be what you created in your head. As with everything, we see things on television or we read things in certain books and we get a biased perspective, regardless of how that's written. And so for you, was it important to unlock that and, I suppose, create a pilgrimage for you to come back to the old country, as it were, and sort of put your boots on the ground and get your hands dirty and find out the truth?
Well, that is what I do, is I try to find the authentic thing, what's real. And, I do consider myself Anglo-Saxon in my spirituality. That's not a limitation. And I think you'll understand this. In America, there tends to be this idea that you either have to be eclectic or you have to follow one specific cultural path and you cannot ever veer from it at all. And to me, that is like the most un-Anglo-Saxon thing you can do.
Yes.
First of all, look at our language and what has happened with our language over the years. The French conquered us. French-speaking people conquered us. What did we do? We said, fine. We just took a bunch of French words and put them in our language. We have no trouble borrowing from other people. So I think it's fine. Everything doesn't have to be what was done in England in 500 AD. I think there are people who follow Anglo-Saxon spirituality and they are so focused on it. That's all they will do is what was done at that time. And I think that's just foolish. I kind of take the attitude of, well, what would the Saxons do? I can evolve a little bit. I don't pretend. I'm not going to take something like chakras and pretend that's an old English thing or anything like that. Yes. But I can explore other things. Even with the playing cards, I was kind of hesitant. I probably would have written this book 10 years earlier, but because I have presented Anglo-Saxon spirituality in my original books and runes, especially Old English runes, in my original books. Obviously, the ancient Anglo-Saxons were not using playing cards.
No.
But you know why? Because they didn't have playing cards. And finally, I realized something. I was able to sit down and write the book. And you brought up something yourself that validates my own thinking. Your presumably very British grandmother taught you how to use playing cards. It's like, yeah, but then when they would have playing cards, of course they'd use it if it was something useful to them. Mm. So I don't pretend that playing card divination is this old Anglo-Saxon practice, but I don't think there's anything wrong with exploring, as long as you're honest about it. Mm. I do think it's wrong if you just make up stuff, because you want to sell a book or something. Recently, I saw there was a book. Actually, I was asked to blurb the book, and I politely declined because in the book, the author said that Wicca comes from a Latin word meaning wise one. And I'm not really all that fluent in Latin, but I do know that Wicca comes from an Old English word meaning a witch. It's like, I don't think it's right to promote something that is not true, but at the same time, as an Anglo-Saxon pagan, I think I'm well within my rights to borrow anything I want that's making my life better, that's improving my life. Mm. I don't limit myself. Being Anglo-Saxon doesn't limit me. The good thing is it focuses me. Mm. I didn't want to take the Disney ride. I wanted to really get into it and and learn about it. And that can be hard sometimes because, let's face it, our ancestors were not perfect in every way. part of becoming an Anglo-Saxon pagan involved forgiving my ancestors for things, realizing they were struggling the best they could, but maybe they were doing things. I mean, I'm not going to take up human sacrifice. I don't care what they did. There are things that they did because they were wrong, and it is my inspiration, but it's your religion should not be a live action role playing game. It ought to, you can't just LARP through it. You need to be flexible and use. So it's an inspiration. England is my inspiration.
Mm. Mm. Well, it's a flexible thing, Alan, because you've got to be able, as you say, because you can just become trapped by being so fundamentally focused on a belief system that you don't try and adapt or see the maturity or the changes that would be. Like, as you say, what people did 1,500 years ago is what they had. That's why people would use bone dyes, or they would cast bones, or they would use their environments around them to gauge or to assist them. Whereas these days, most people have their hands on anything. If people need a new deck, or they want a crystal ball or a pendant or anything like that, you can order one and it'll be with you within a couple of days. Whereas people sometimes you can get so hung up on the old ways of any sort of pagan pathway, I think sometimes, that either you try, as you say there, retrofit it and try and take things that people do now and sort of force it on to somebody, as we were saying. Nobody was using playing cards before 1200 anywhere in the world, as far as we're aware. But I've seen people, especially when it comes to just normal playing cards, there are people that create these stories about them that there's no evidence for. We don't know why. And even things as basic as people just presume that every country in the world uses a 52 card deck, but they don't. Yeah. Some countries in Europe use 30, 34. Some countries don't have more than 52. Some people use jokers. Some people use blank cards. It all depends on the region and where you are. And so even something as simple as a pack of cards, you can presume it's the same everywhere in the modern world, but it isn't. Yeah.
Absolutely. When they came, playing cards came into Europe through Egypt, or through the country that would become known as Egypt. And very soon in its history, by the time tarot was being created, which was only like 150 years later or so, there were already distinct cards. The cards that were being used in France were different than the cards that were being used in Italy, and they were different from the cards being used in Germany. It's partly because again, no printing press, that these were not being printed. These were being hand painted on cardstock, so people would do their own little artistic thing, which is why, you can see, like, in a deck of playing cards, you can see the similarities between, like the suits that we have and the 4 suits of the tarot deck. For instance, diamonds. We got diamonds. Okay, well, you don't have any diamonds in the tarot deck. You've got, usually now it's called pentacles, but that's because they wanted to, witch it up a little bit. But the original that they had was like coins. Now, if you look at it as coins, they got coins, diamonds. You can totally see a similarity there. We're talking about wealth. We're talking about things of the earth, so you have that. Likewise, you got spades for playing cards. Well, you don't have spades in the tarot deck. You have swords. But what are these things? Both of them are metal tools. One tends to be more associated with war. One tends to be more associated with gardening. But both of them are metal tools that are used in some way. Then you have your clubs. Now, the clubs, these are very stylized in playing cards, but think of what it's called. There's reasons it's called a club. Like in tarot decks, they're usually called wands or something like that. But originally, they were cudgels, they were clubs, batons, something they had a name like that. The only one that's really, really different is hearts. There's my card. Is hearts. And that tends to be very, very different because in the tarot deck, it's cups.
Yes.
And, cups, hearts, you don't really see the connection there. But there is a certain thing about, in a poetic sense, cups and hearts are both things that can be filled up.
Vessels.
They're both things that can be empty. Yeah, so they are vessels. So, there is a similarity there. But that's an example. And the reason they're different is because the deck that tarot was designed from was one kind of deck. And the deck that evolved into our modern playing cards was, I think, from France, but was a different style of deck where those suits had taken on slightly different imagery. And you could go to another part of Europe and there would have been yet another. I think there were like about 3 main branches that there were, but even in there, then there were local variations.
Yes, I think as well. This is the other thing about in regards to this that sometimes people, as you say there, you if you think about it, it is quite simple to understand what refers to what, Alaric. And like you say, as we would say in there, as soon as you said hearts and cups, the first thing I thought, well, you can fill them up, you can empty them. It's it's a very obvious thing without sort of, as you said, romanticizing it. They are what they are, and so those kind of things are very easily kind of, you can see the comparison and the similarities straight away. But if you looked at them visually, you wouldn't do that. And I think that's the thing. You've got to take yourself out of the imagery and look at the symbolism rather than the picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was one of the things, I suppose, as well, Alaric, when you started, as you said earlier, this perhaps was a book that you should have written previously in your career. Do you think it's one of those things where, as you've matured and expanded your knowledge base, you're more comfortable dealing with this kind of subject because it's slightly outside of the normal parameters of what's on trend? And therefore, for some people, the frustrating thing about these wonderful subjects is often our histories get overlooked because people either can't be bothered to do the learning, or they can't be bothered to do the research, or they just work on a version that they've been gatekeeped into, and therefore that for them is theirs. So for you, did you have to sort of relearn how to use the playing deck in that way, or is it something that regardless, have you always sort of used it regularly, or did you find yourself training up more, writing the book and just checking that you were still as on it as you've always thought so?
Well, just personally, I continued to use them. I just tell people about it because there was this part of me that it's like, well, this is an Anglo-Saxon. So it was kind of like I felt almost guilty about it, until, like I said, I realized it's not Anglo-Saxon. Yes, it's Anglo-Saxon because I am. So technically anything I do is something an Anglo-Saxon person is doing, I mean, how can you not? Anything you aren't, I mean, I imagine a lot of your background, I don't really know how much of yours is Celtic or Anglo-Saxon, but I imagine you have a lot of Anglo-Saxon ancestry in you because most English people do. So literally anything you do is what an Anglo-Saxon man does. As soon as you do it, it's something an Anglo-Saxon man does. And when I realized that, then I felt more comfortable with letting people know and going ahead and going public with it and writing a book about it. But on my own, it's like as long as people didn't see me, I was doing it anyway. I do think I pull them out a lot more now because actually having to sit down and write about it gave me a much deeper appreciation. But that's true of anything. When I wrote A Handbook of Saxon Sorcery and Magic, after I wrote the book, I found that I was using runes a lot more frequently. Not that I wasn't using them before. I mean, it's not like I write a book and suddenly, I learned something new. I mean, I know it before I write the book,
Yes.
But in the process of writing about something, it tends to give you a deeper appreciation for it. And so I was doing the same thing with the runes. After I wrote that book, I was using runes just a lot more often because it had drawn me back to them. And in the same way with Fortune in Your Hands, after I wrote the book, I do realize I use playing cards a lot more than I used to. But I've always used them. I mean, it's like, I can tell you where my divination deck is always kept in the middle drawer in my desk. So it's right there if I need it, And
I suppose, was it a challenge to go to the publishers with this particular title? Did you think you would have some resistance?
Not a bit. It's really easy. Partly because my first book, Travels to Middle-earth, had gone out of print with Llewellyn, who had originally released it. And a company in Chicago, it's a newer company, a smaller company, Cross Crow Books, had asked me if they could re-release Travels to Middle-earth. So Llewellyn kindly gave me the rights back. I mean, it was in my contract, but I suppose they could have been, kind of buttholes about it. But they gave me the rights back, and I went ahead and gave them to Cross Crow Books, and Travels to Middle-earth came out again. Well, when that happened, I wound up talking to these boys who run that company quite a bit, and I had mentioned it to them. So before the book was written, I knew that Cross Crow Books, if I wanted to, they would publish it. There was no question in my mind they would publish it. I actually went to Llewellyn, and I'll admit, from a selfish standpoint, there's every reason to go to Llewellyn. They get me everywhere. They will get me in a little bookstore in York where I can't understand what anybody's saying. They will get me in Italy. They will get me everywhere. So there's that selfish aspect, but honestly, the reason I went to Llewellyn was because Alicia Gallo, who is one of the acquisitions editors there, she is the person who gave me my first chance. She took on Travels to Middle-earth, and I will always be grateful to her. If she ever were to work for another company, I would go to her no matter where she went. She will always get first choice on one of my books. But when I presented it to her, I knew I had a publisher anyway, so I felt really comfortable about it. And I actually told her, it's like, if you don't want it, I've got somebody else. Here you go. This is what. And I explained to her why I was excited about it and what, why I thought it was important. I never write anything. I mean, I cannot tell you how many books I've started and then just put them aside because halfway into the first chapter, I realized this book does not need to exist. Unless I feel like there's a need for the book. It's a lot of work writing a book. It's a lot of work. And I'm not going to go to all that work for the personal glory or whatever, I do it because I feel like I have something to share and that it's important to share. So there was that aspect too. When I showed it to her, I was very confident because I didn't have, I had somebody else in the wings who I could, hey, I got somebody else to publish this. But B, because I knew it was something that needed to be published, because it's something I really believed in. And that's how I presented it to her, and she agreed. And so now we have this cool, nifty book out.
Well, as you said there, I think it is important because these are the kinds of things that we're on the cusp of losing track of things, I think, because especially in the modern era, things seem to be so here today and gone tomorrow, I think. And often there seems to be, and this seems to affect a lot of areas of strange phenomenon, whether we're talking about witchcraft or we're talking about the supernatural or whatever, Alaric. You see it more and more these days that sometimes it's almost as if anything before 1999 never happened and it didn't exist. And therefore, when you have a book like this that is referring to the divination power of a normal pack of playing cards, that history is far longer than tarot, and yet people just didn't seem to care about it. It wasn't fashionable, wasn't cool. And so it seems to be a fringe subject inside a fringe subject, which will surprise people. But I think there's more and more of this. I was recently speaking to a lady called Charity Bedell, who's written a book in regards to using dirt in witchcraft practice. It's one of those things because people always talk about using water or light or whatever, but earth is the cornerstone of everything. It's where we grow, or where our animals are living amongst. Everything that we have some connection with is based in earth, really. It all grows around us, it supports us, it takes us there, it allows us to grow food or to visit these beautiful special sites where it seems to be imbuing the nature around it with magical feelings for whatever reason. But that's another aspect of witchcraft that has fallen out of favour. And when you think about, like you were saying, when we talk about the elemental aspects of what people follow in Wicca or pagan or whatever, Earth is an element. It's part of this process, and yet it's not the fashionable element, is it?
Right. No, and I'm kind of looking forward to. I want to get that book you're talking about because it sounds fascinating to me. And I'm a total green witch, so the earth is really a big part of my own spirituality. I mean, she's our mother, she's our home. Like you said, it's like she's the source of our food. You know, we would not be here tomorrow if it was not for her. And you know, we tend to have a love-hate relationship with the earth. You know, people will talk about earth spirituality, but then they'll turn around and talk about, I mean, the very word dirty.
Yeah.
Physical dirty, like sexual dirty. I mean, dirty is always this bad, we use dirt as this bad thing, but if it wasn't for dirt, you wouldn't have anything to eat tonight. You know, dirt is sacred. Dirt is holy. You know, I think, you know, if we get past it, you know, seeing that little kid just covered with mud and dirt and sand, that's a beautiful, sacred, holy thing. And is there some disease possible? Yeah, of course there is, because that's part of life. But you know what's happening is the kid who gets to roll around in the dirt, they're building up immunities because that's what your body does.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like dirt is a sacred thing. And, you know, okay, so dirty jokes, yay, sex. You know, there's so many things worse than dirt. Yeah, so
it's the connotation, isn't it? Like you say there, the term dirty is often used as derision or to cast scorn on certain things, and so it's one of
soil. Yeah, something is soiled, like that's a bad thing. But soil, we need soil.
I think it's all about who decides. I mean, you can unpick these and go through their histories, and you can kind of see why these terms have stuck and what they mean and what they refer to. But really, as you say, it's the most natural element that we have around us, and it's why all of us are here today. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be here at all, or to give us shelter or whatever. And it's something that our ancestors, regardless of whichever paths they followed, wherever they were in the world, it's where they all start. It's how it begins.
Absolutely.
I suppose as well, when you were pulling this together, we can always be very confident in our own knowledge and our own abilities, Alaric, when we're dealing with a specialised subject, such as using playing cards for divination purposes. Were you surprised at the breadth of information, knowledge that was still out there but hasn't really sort of been looked at for 30, 40, 50 years?
Well, I don't know. I can't say I'm surprised because I grew up with it. You know, I'm very much aware of how much is just not really looked at anymore. A lot of times the things that I recommend to people, I'm recommending books and things like that, they're not new. I'm much more likely to be recommending something to you that was written in the 60s or 70s than something that was written partly because everything's written now, not everything. No, there are some really cool things that are written now, but many of the things that are written now, they are those trendy things. We're living in the TikTok age, you know. A lot of what you will read is just stuff that comes up on social media. There are concepts that people are literally resistant to because they've heard fluffy things that somebody made up. That becomes their truth. And you try to talk to them about historical things, and it's like, no, that can't be true because I learned it this way. Actually, one thing that got me personally looking more into, like, becoming much more studious about paganism as a whole and magic, and really looking at it from a more objective standpoint, was when I realized that most people have no clue of what the elements are or how they interact. What is presented to people today, and you can hold to those beliefs as wrong as they are, you can hold on to them and still read playing cards, because none of what I'm about to say now really has anything to do that will affect reading cards. But the way elements are presented to people today, I don't know how they got so wrong. I suspect that somebody was under an oath because, that's kind of a thing we like to do, or used to like to do a lot, to not reveal certain things. And I think that something was misrepresented intentionally because we couldn't say what was really going on. And this has to do with the elements, where if you see people associate directions with the elements, like with Wicca, they do the circle casting, they'll have an element in each direction. But if you really want to get into like herbalism or something like that, elemental associations with the cardinal points, that's a thing. But inevitably now you will see water and earth reversed, where water is associated with the west and earth is associated with the north. Now, if you actually study anything about real, traditional European elemental theory, which was a real thing, it was the foundation of European medicine for like over 2,000 years, you realize this is an impossibility. Water has to be in opposition to fire.
Yes.
Because water is cool and moist, fire is hot and dry. Earth has to be in opposition to air, because earth is cool and dry and air is warm and moist. They have to be in this order. And when they are ordered like this, suddenly you have this beautiful pattern. I think it was Aristotle, don't quote me. Well, you don't have to, because this is the thing I'm just talking about. I think it's Aristotle who was talking about how the elements are not static things, how they are constantly transforming one thing into another. And when you position them this way, you see what he's talking about. In other words, if you have water, if water begins to warm up, it transforms into air. Just as if you boiled water, suddenly it becomes steam. Water, warming it, transforms it into air. On the other hand, if you have water and it still remains cool, but it starts to dry out, it becomes earth. Now, this may seem like a trivial thing, and it is if you're doing the Disney ride. But if you want to get really into this stuff, get into the alchemy of it, get into the real science of it, like even herbal remedies and things like that in traditional European medicine, this is very, very important, because what you're doing is trying to transform these elements. So you have to acknowledge this pattern where water is opposite fire, earth is opposite air. And this isn't like something it's not a thing you're going to see on TikTok. This is a historical fact. We know this. We know that European philosophers, scientists associated these elements with these directions for 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's an error just to toss that out the window. So that's just one example, but you'll see it through our magical philosophies. So many people today, they have these trendy ideas that really have no substance behind them, while at the same time they are ignoring literally millennia of the experiences of our ancestors.
Yeah. Or they'll create some kind of hodgepodge mixture using a variety of cultures that creates something that they will describe it in a modern sense. But when you look at it, it's irrelevant, because it's taking different cultural belief systems that aren't connected. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not one of these people who gets really hardcore about things. You can't see it from here because you are in my great hall here. But if you go over into that room over there, that is basically our television entertainment room, and it's totally Hellenic. You go over there, we have statues of Artemis and Pan and Hermes and Apollo and wall hangings, everything. It's very Hellenic. But we keep it over there. We don't toss everything in one big pile.
Yes.
I think it's fine for me to appreciate the Hellenic deities, but I'm not going to do a thing where suddenly I try to make Athena get along with Woden.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I just think that's an error, and I think it's disrespectful to the gods and to your ancestors to try to just shoehorn everything in as one thing.
Is there one key aspect, now that the book's out there in the real world, that you hope anybody that reads it takes from it, Alaric?
I just hope people actually do it.
Mm.
You know, I want people, okay, I'm about to say something I didn't mean. I was about to say, I don't want people to read my book. Well, of course I want people to read my book. But if you want to make me happy, don't just read the book. You know, I want people to take that book and it become a tool and use the book. The book will tell you, you know, how to do this, how to learn these. It'll give you a feel for the suits, a feel for the numbers. It'll explain how to do this. I have one chapter just on the ethics of divination that's so impressed. Okay, Llewellyn has an annual publication called The Witch's Companion, and the editor of The Witch's Companion was so impressed with that chapter of the book that she had me rework it so it isn't a chapter in a book, but it's going to be published in The Witch's Companion in 2025. I mean, there's some really good material in this book. You pick up this book and you actually read it and study it and work with it, and you can become a pro at this. I mean, I give you all the information you need. You just read the book for a fun read. I don't really get what you're doing. You know, ultimately, and this is true not just of divination, but everything about paganism as a whole. It's not what you believe. It's not what you read. It's what you do. You know, it's your actions, and it's so important. And I think this book is awesome. Here, I want to just blurb this because I was a little bit resistant to it, and I was wrong. My editor, Andrea Neff, she is, when we're actually working together editing a book, because it's a horrible thing to go to, at that moment, I hate her guts. But, you know, yes. After the fact, when we're not actually working together, I love this woman. She is so amazing and so awesome. And she insisted that we do this. So in addition to all the information in the book, there's this cool little part in the back where there's like a little chart. Yes. And you can go to the chart at the back. And don't just look at the chart, read the damn book, because I had to work pretty hard at this. She wanted like one or two words of what does this card mean? What would this card mean? Now, obviously, that's not the answer, because the card can mean many, many things. Yes. But like, we talked about the 3 of hearts. I actually have here for 3, if you look at hearts and you go down to 3, I literally write hobbies, because I think hobby is one kind of feeling I get from that card. Yeah. So it gives you 1 or 2 words where you can just like at a glance get a feel for, oh yeah, that's what that card means. And especially when you start doing this, it's like, even though you've learned all the numbers and you've learned all of the suits, you know, you get like, you know, 8 of clubs, manifestation and transformation. What does that mean? Well, you know, if you're stuck, if you're just stumped there, there's this great little chart down here where you can just go down here and, hey, big changes, you know, and then that will hopefully, I hope it'll be like the abstract symbols here. I hope there's just enough here, not to really tell you what that card means, but to kick off something in your head where you can pull something out. Yeah. And since this book has come out, and working with it with other people who are trying to learn how to use divination, this is probably the best part of this whole book, is this little chart that Andrea Neff insisted that we have in the book. And at the time, I thought she was just full of it, but no, as usual, she was right.
Well, I think it's good as well, because sometimes you can go into it, you can read a book and you can, like you say, I find it peculiar that people would buy books about practical witchcraft or practical paganism or whatever, and they don't do anything with it.
All the time.
And so if you are going to buy such a book as this, then for me, the key aspect of it is by using what you read about and learning about. And as you say, having this table in the back is a great starting point just for cross-referencing till the reader begins to feel confident in their own ability, Alaric.
Oh, yeah. I don't want somebody just going to the back of the book, you know, like right off. To me, it's like what you do if you are having troubles with it. But it's a really quick thing you can look at if you're having a problem. And again, you know, and if that isn't enough, you can go back and look up in the book where I talk about the cards in much more depth.
Fabulous. Well, like I say, it was a fascinating read. It took me to a place I didn't expect to revisit in my my middle ages. But it reminded me of some good times, and to be honest, after reading it, I thought, yeah, I'm going to start putting this back into practice myself, because I used to enjoy doing it. I used to enjoy freaking people out doing it as well. That was the thing, Alaric, I think.
Well, hearing that from you, I'm going to try not to get emotional. I'm a double Pisces, sorry. I get emotional at the drop of a hat. But hearing that from you is undoubtedly the highlight of my day. Possibly my week, but definitely the highlight of my day, because that's why I do this. You know, it's like I want to give to the world, and to see somebody get value out of it, get worth out of it like that. It just makes my heart. I mean, you know, I give you a big hug, but you're like thousands of miles away. So, but thank you for sharing that with me. Writing can be a lonely thing sometimes, so knowing that you're actually out there touching other people and making a difference it really means a lot to me.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for writing it. And so, before I let you leave, Alaric, where can everybody get a hold of a copy of this book, and also your previous work, and anything else you'd like to advise if anybody wants to get hold of you or keep up to date with what you've got going on, my friend?
Okay, well, this one, I'm going to tell you how I want you to get it. Okay, first of all, you know what I really want? Okay, now I'll tell you how you can get it. You can get it. It's easy to get. You can go to Llewellyn. They got a website. You go to Llewellyn, www.llewellyn.com, and you can go on their website and order it directly from the publisher. You know, if you have no soul at all, you can order it from Amazon and make sure there is a huge corporate giant that will eventually take over our entire world and make our lives irrelevant. But you might get a better deal from them. So, but if you want to make me happy, if you really want to make me happy, go to your local bookseller, ideally your local New Age, pagan, occult bookseller, if you've got one, and ask them to order a copy for you. Couple of reasons. First of all, the real selfish reason, because I'm a witch. I admit I'm very selfish in some ways. The very selfish reason is when they order your copy, it's very likely they will order at least one other copy. And so, yay, get on a bookshelf, you know. But honestly, I'm also a very good person, I think. I'd like to think. The real thing is we need to support these shops.
Yes.
Order it from your local bookseller. You know, that little New Age shop down the street, it's like if they don't have what you want, try to give them your business anyway. Say, most of them, if you say, would you order this for me? Most of them will do that. And you're giving them the money, and you may not appreciate them, but they are part of the lifeblood of our culture and our community. You know, when they're gone, how do we keep in contact? What do we have? What's our connection? Is it we're online? Woohoo! Well, that's a tenuous connection. It's like practically worthless. You know, if you've got a little shop, that can. They are so much more than just a business. That's the place that new person who doesn't know anything, there's their resource. They can come in and learn something. You know, there's a place where people meet each other. It can be the heart and soul of our community. So please order it from your local bookseller if you will. And yeah, Fortune in Your Hands, great book, very proud of it. I'm also going to pimp this one. I guess I shouldn't say pimp really, but that's what I'm doing. This is my very first book that came out that Llewellyn initially published. And as I said, it's like it went out of publication. The bad thing about Llewellyn, because they are so big and so successful, is your book has to have a certain sales rate to stay in publication. I understand this. I don't resent them or anything, but it's just a fact of life. They can't afford to have a book in their warehouses if it's not selling at a certain rate. And this book is for a very specific audience. So it went out of print, and Travis from Middle Earth then was picked up by Cross Crow Books in Chicago. And I love this. First of all, the cover is like so cool. I love all my Llewellyn covers too, but this one meant a lot to me because the author, Wick Malloway, actually contacted me, and he sent me about half a dozen little images, possible sketches of what the cover could look like. And it just happened to be the same day that evening our local pagan community was having a community meetup. So I took them with me. and everybody looked at them. Everybody looked at them and decided what they liked and didn't like. One person on one picture that had the two little ravens, they liked that. Another one liked Woden. They didn't like Woden with the long robe on or with pants on. They wanted something with the long robe because he looked kind of knob-kneedy, like weird with his bare legs.
Yes.
So I took all of their suggestions and I told this guy, I said, I'm not an artist, but I took it to our community. Here's all the feedback I got. And I swear he put it all together and he came back with this book, this cover. And I'm like, this is an amazing cover. I love my cover. Yeah. So Travels to Middle-earth, I already had it out, obviously, but I'm really glad I have it out because I didn't realize that this was an English podcast at the time. And I do think that English people, more than most people, will get something out of this because it is about, Anglo-Saxon spirituality, about Old English spirituality. It was my first book. It's a book I'm very, very proud of. And I'm going to tell you the same thing with this. It's like, don't got a soul, order it from Amazon. I'm actually not going to criticize you if you do it. It's better than not ordering it at all. You can order it directly from Cross Crow Books. And they're smaller, obviously, than Llewellyn, because everybody is, but they are so enthusiastic. The guys and girls down at Cross Crow Books, they're all young people, and they are so enthusiastic. They are the future of our magical community. So I would love to see you support Cross Crow Books. But again, if you really want to make me happy, go to your local bookseller and put your money there. Give them your money. Cross Crow Books will understand. They're making some profit off this anyway. But yeah, this is a book. If English people, I have so many English readers who have contacted me and told me how much it meant to them that I wrote this book because everything that was coming out was Celtic. Yeah. And now this is very much introductory. So. And then if you like the magic aspect, I don't have one with me, but my book, A Handbook of Saxon Sorcery and Magic, that's my big rune book. Like the first half of it is all about runes for both magic and divination. And then the second half, other modalities. So it's just other things that were thrown in because when I wrote this book, again, Elder Futhark is the big trendy thing. So if you go to a New Age store, very often if you look for runes, that's what you get, Elder Futhark. Well, if you're studying the Old English runes, trying to use the Elder Futhark, and I worked this out mathematically, it's pretty much the same as trying to read tarot but not using any swords. You have the same, like, about 80% of your symbols. You're just missing some of them because there are more runes in the Old English runes than in the Elder Futhark. Knowing this, it's like I'm trying to write a book about Old English runes, but it's like, well, what if somebody buys this book and then they can't find runes anywhere? And so I felt like I needed to put more meat into it. Yeah. So then there's other things like wart cunning, like herbalism, things like that. All of it focused from an Old English, from Anglo-Saxon perspective, but just other modalities of magic that are included in there also. And I'm very proud of that book. To me, it's my great work. And if you're not into magic, don't buy it because that's all it's about, But if you are into magic, it is a wonderful book. And a lot of the people who are fans of Travels to Middle-earth that have gone on to get A Handbook of Saxon Sorcery and Magic as well. And that's about it. I was on Facebook, but recently, for God only knows why, because Facebook is as soulless as Amazon, basically, Facebook decided I don't really exist. So I'm no longer on Facebook. Actually, I think there is an Alaric Albertsson profile that's there, but if you go there, I'm not going to see anything you do, and I can't respond. It's just a dead profile that's sitting there because, there are no people involved with Facebook anymore. It's all AI that does everything. Nobody's steering the ship.
Well, I'll put links to the show notes for everybody to track down the books and the publishers as well, as you refer to there, and as someone that's a big supporter of local bookshops as well, I completely concur with what you're saying there, and their importance in our communities even into the modern era. And I just want to say thank you very much for a fascinating and insightful conversation, and thank you for your time and your trouble today for joining me. It's been a real pleasure, Alaric.
Well, it's been a pleasure on my side. I guess I was totally surprised to find out that you were English, was not expecting it, but it was kind of a little extra special delight. So thank you so much, sir.